Hello, my name is David Winch and I'm a chartered accountant, a forensic accountant with Bartfield's Forensic Accountants. And in today's webinar, we're going to spend 30 minutes going through a couple more of the 8 questions for the court. So, firstly, I shall just quickly run through what those 8 questions are, and then we will address question 3, which is in some ways the most complicated and difficult question for the court. What is the defendant's benefit? It isn't always the most important question because sometimes the available amount can be the critical factor that affects the amount ordered to be paid. But in my experience, the defendant's benefit is the most difficult and complex question that the court has to address. And then I will say a little bit, and it will be a little bit, on how much of the defendant's benefit was obtained jointly, and a quick roundup of how Bartfield's Forensic Accountants can help you. Right, quickly then, the 8 key questions. Questions 1 and 2 we covered in the last webinar a fortnight ago, which is on the website if you want to review it. Question 1, does the court have power to make a confiscation order? And question 2, does the defendant have a criminal lifestyle? And of course, that decision, that finding as to whether he has or does not have a criminal lifestyle is a key component in the defendant's benefit. What is the defendant's benefit? And I'll explain in a minute how that is limited if he does not have a criminal lifestyle and what the implications of a criminal lifestyle are. And question 4, how much of the defendant's benefit was obtained jointly? Then in a fortnight's time, we'll look at question 5 and question 6. What is the defendant's available amount? And what amount should the defendant be required to pay? And then questions 7 and 8, how much time should the defendant be allowed to make that payment? And how long should the default sentence be? Okay, so let's crack on with what is the defendant's benefit. The defendant's benefit can fall into 3 parts. The first part is the benefit of his particular criminal conduct. And I'll explain in a moment what that means. And then there is the assumed benefit arising under the statutory assumptions of Section 10. And when I say Section 10, of course, I'm speaking from the point of view of the Proceeds of Crime Act Part 2, which applies in England and Wales. If you're in Scotland or in Northern Ireland, there are very similar statutory assumptions and very similar provisions in Parts 3 and 4 of POCA, but the actual section numbers, of course, will be different. And then the third element is other benefit. And again, I will explain what I mean by other benefit, but I'm saying here benefit which is neither benefit of particular criminal conduct nor benefit under the assumptions, but yet is still the defendant's benefit. Now, if the defendant does not have a criminal lifestyle, then the only benefit relevant to him is that first part, the benefit of his particular criminal conduct. That is the only part that applies to a defendant who does not have a criminal lifestyle. But of course, if he does have a criminal lifestyle, then all 3 parts come into play. So what is the benefit of particular criminal conduct? Well, it's all of the following. It's the benefit of the offences concerned. And we talked a fortnight ago about what's meant by the offence or the offences concerned. And we'll have a quick reprise of that in a minute. So benefit of the offences concerned, benefit of other offences of which the defendant was convicted in the same proceedings as the offence concerned, benefit of other offences which were taken into consideration in sentencing the defendant for the offence concerned. And all of that is set out in subsection 3 of section 76. All of these things, as you'll see, relate to the proceedings which are currently ongoing in the Crown Court, the current proceedings, not any past proceedings of the defendant. So even where the defendant has a criminal lifestyle based on a history of past convictions, the benefit of those past convictions doesn't fall into benefit of particular criminal conduct. The offence is concerned, let's just remind ourselves, the offence or offences concerned are the ones which are relied upon to satisfy the condition in subsection 2 of section 6, and that's defined in subsection 9. So in other words, these are the offences which give these are the convictions which give the court the power or even the obligation to proceed with confiscation in this case. So, what is the benefit of an offence? Well, the defendant's benefit of an offence is the property obtained by him as a result of or in connection with his conduct in committing that offence. Property here is used in the legal sense of meaning any asset, could be a tangible asset, could be an intangible asset, any sort of asset in money or money's worth is property for this purpose. What about the phrase as a result of or in connection with? Well, that is a fairly wide phrase. As you can see, it goes a little bit further than property obtained as a result of the offence. It's to include property obtained in connection with. And the courts have occasionally looked at how broad that definition is, and they've concluded that it does not extend to property obtained for the purpose of enabling the commission of the offence. So if I go and buy a crowbar in order to break into a house, the acquisition of the crowbar is not property obtained as a result of or in connection with the offence. It's property obtained for the purpose of committing the offence, but not benefit in this context. And another key thing we have to remember is that this talks about, and again it's section 76, it talks about property obtained. It's not limited to property retained, nor is it property gained in the sense of a profit. So if I buy for £10,000 some cocaine, which has a sale value to me of £20,000, then my benefit is going to be £20,000 because that's the value of the property I have obtained in connection with the drug trafficking. It's not limited to the profit I'm going to make on the sale of that cocaine. It is, as I say, the property obtained. Now, always in confiscation, there are interpretations and there are grey areas and there are particular circumstances where things might be different. So in particular defined circumstances, the court will look to the profit rather than the whole of the property obtained. But we're going to spend 30 minutes on benefit here, not 30 hours, and we can't go into too much of the detail. So for our purposes today, we'll just say it's limited to property obtained and not property retained and not profit. Sometimes the defendant actually doesn't, in a sense, obtain a benefit, except that he avoids or evades a liability. So that, for example, you might evade taxes by not filling in your tax returns correctly or something like that. Do you obtain anything there? Well, yes. Pocker says you obtain a pecuniary advantage. And some of you will have known that phrase from the Theft Act many years ago, which talked about obtaining a pecuniary advantage. But in the Theft Act, the term pecuniary advantage had a particular and somewhat limited meaning. Here in POCA, pecuniary advantage does not have that same limited meaning. So when we talk in POCA about obtaining a pecuniary advantage, what the Act says is that the defendant is deemed to obtain a sum of money equal to the value of the pecuniary advantage. So that if I evade a tax liability of £5,000, then I have obtained £5,000 benefit as far as POCA is concerned for confiscation purposes. But the liability in question here must be a liability of the defendant. So if the defendant is an individual, then it's a liability of the defendant himself. It's my tax liability. Or if the defendant is a company, then it's the company's tax liability if the company is being convicted of the offence. But suppose I'm convicted of an offence of submitting false accounts for my company, from which the company has obtained a pecuniary advantage. Well, in POCA terms, I personally haven't obtained that advantage, the company has, so it won't be my benefit. There may be benefit flowing through to me, through my company, through the company having obtained that advantage. But it's not a straightforward matter of, if I've filled in a false company tax return, and the company has saved £5,000 of tax or evaded £5,000 of tax as a result, then it's not a simple and straightforward matter to say that I personally have obtained a pecuniary advantage of £5,000. It gets a little more complicated than that. Again, Section 76 is where we're looking for the pecuniary advantage. Property jointly obtained. Now, I said I was going to come onto that at the end, but just briefly now, where property is obtained jointly by more than one defendant or more than one person, even if the other person is actually not apprehended and not charged and doesn't become a defendant, then each person obtains the whole of it. So to take a very simple example, John and Joe burgle an art gallery and they steal a painting worth £100,000. Each of them has obtained property worth £100,000. And each of them, therefore, has obtained a benefit of £100,000 from this offence. Obviously, that causes a problem if they are each subject to confiscation in the sum of £100,000. And we will come on to that later. That, if you like, is question 4. Okay, that's done the benefit of particular criminal conduct. And as I say, if the defendant does not have a criminal lifestyle, that's the end of it as far as benefit is concerned. But if he does have a criminal lifestyle, then there is also the question of assumed benefit. And the statutory assumptions of Section 10 will operate to assume that certain property is benefit of the defendant's general criminal conduct. And I should emphasize that a defendant's general criminal conduct is all of his criminal conduct, whenever that occurred. So back to the day he was born. So assumed benefit. Effectively, the prosecution have an initial burden with assumed benefit of identifying property and demonstrating that it falls within the scope of one of the assumptions. That is the prosecution's job. That is what we should see happening in, for example, a Section 16 statement. It's not a high burden, it's not a difficult burden on the prosecution because, for example, if they can produce bank statements in the name of the defendant and show money going into his bank account, then that's sufficient to identify the property and they will later say that that falls within the scope of the assumptions. So not a big burden, but the burden is there and shouldn't be overlooked entirely. Once the prosecution have done that, the burden falls on the defendant to show either that the assumption is incorrect or that there would be a serious risk of injustice if the assumption were made. Note that that's a serious risk of injustice, not a risk of serious injustice. So that is then the burden of proof, which falls on the defendant on the balance of probabilities. So let's look at those Section 10 assumptions. There are 4 assumptions in Section 10, but 3 of them are particularly important, and I'm just going to mention those 3. The first is that any property transferred to the defendant after the relevant day was obtained by him as a result of his general criminal conduct. Any property transferred to the defendant after the relevant day. So that's going to be benefit. That's the assumption. And the other side of that coin, if you like, any expenditure incurred by the defendant after the relevant day was met by him from property obtained by him as a result of his general criminal conduct. So again, you're going to look at this expenditure, and the Section 16 statement is going to say that is benefit. And the third assumption, any property held by the defendant after the date of his conviction is assumed to have been obtained by him as a result of his general criminal conduct. And therefore, the value of it is going to be benefit. Those are the assumptions. That's where things, if you like, can kick off in the Section 16 statement. So property transferred to the defendant, what do we mean? Well, I mentioned credits to his bank account. If the defendant's got a bank account in his own name or in his name jointly with others, and there are credits to it after the relevant day, then the prosecution are entitled to assume that those monies credited to the account are benefit, are obtained by him as a result of his general criminal conduct, without needing to specify what that conduct might be, without needing to point to anything at all. They're entitled to say, we assume that this is benefit for confiscation purposes. And indeed, an awful lot of our work as expert witnesses is in dealing with bank account transactions. And we have software and we have systems for going through bank account transactions, extracting data, summarizing it, manipulating it, if you like, looking for patterns in it. This is where we help solicitors and barristers with Section 16 statements, with challenging them. What about expenditure? Well, obviously expenditure, if expenditure has come from a bank account and we've already said that there's benefit from the money going into that bank account, then we're not going to count it again when it goes out, because that would be double counting, that would be a duplication. So what we're really looking at here with expenditure is expenditure that has not gone through a bank account or another source that has been recognized. So we've got the cash purchase of a motor vehicle, for example, might be an example of expenditure which will be assumed to have been funded from general criminal conduct. And then finally, as I say, any property held by the defendant after the date of his conviction. And here it doesn't matter when he acquired it. I have a house which I bought in the 1970s. If I am convicted and have confiscation on the basis of criminal lifestyle, then the value of that house today will be assumed to be benefit of my general criminal conduct. And obviously I may have an issue in showing how I actually funded that purchase 30, 40 years ago. Several times I've mentioned the relevant day. The relevant day is typically the first day of the period of 6 years ending on the day on which the defendant was charged with the offence concerned. Here we come again to the offence concerned. If we've got a defendant charged on the 19th of April 2018, he might be facing confiscation proceedings now. The relevant day will be 6 years at the first day of the period of 6 years ending on the 19th of April 2018. So that's the 20th of April 2012. And the assumptions will apply from the 20th of April 2012 onwards. So the assumptions don't apply for a period of 6 years. They apply for a period of more than 6 years. In this case, it'll be what? 8 years getting on, 9 years getting on. They apply right up to the day on which the confiscation order is made. There are exceptions to this, particularly where the defendant has previously been subject to criminal lifestyle confiscation on an earlier occasion. That can affect the relevant day. Unfortunately, because we're only doing 30 minutes, we don't have time to go into that today. So those are the assumptions. We've got all this assumed benefit. What can the defendant do? Well, a statutory assumption can be shown to be incorrect. For example, where on a balance of probabilities, the court is satisfied that, say, monies banked were from a legitimate source. So if I have a legitimate employment and my wages from that legitimate employment are paid into my bank account, they're credited to the bank account, then step one, if you like, that will be assumed to be benefit of general criminal conduct. But I can then show that this was legitimate employment income. I rebut the assumption, and it then is no longer treated as assumed benefit. What about a serious risk of injustice? Well, here, a good example of that is duplication of benefit. So, for example, where the court is satisfied that monies that I've banked in my account were actually the benefit of particular criminal conduct, which has already been identified and included in benefit. Say I stole a cheque for £10,000 and I've been convicted of theft of that £10,000. I've banked the £10,000 in my account. Then obviously that £10,000 banking will be an assumed benefit, or can be an assumed benefit, but I will say, no, that's actually covered by the offence of which I've already been convicted. So it would be a duplication. There would be a serious risk of injustice if that were included in benefit again. Okay. I mentioned other benefit. Now, the great thing about other benefit is that very often prosecutors overlook it. And if prosecutors overlook it, then from a defence point of view, you don't have to go there. But what do I mean by other benefit? Well, the sources of other benefit in a criminal lifestyle confiscation will include benefit derived from the defendant's previous convictions. Because you remember we said general criminal conduct relates to all the defendant's criminal conduct from the day he was born. So benefit that he has derived from previous criminal convictions will again be benefit which falls within the scope of his general criminal conduct. Benefit that has been subject to a previous confiscation order is again benefit that's going to fall within his general criminal conduct. And there are provisions which are often overlooked in Section 8 of POCA, which deal with how you treat benefit in earlier confiscation proceedings when you've got a new confiscation proceeding with a criminal lifestyle. Effectively, what you do is you bring it, all that previous benefit, you bring it all in as benefit this time, and then you deduct from that the amounts which the defendant has been ordered to pay previously. Also benefit from the defendant's criminal conduct of which he's not been convicted. What about if he's faced a long list of offences, the prosecution have decided for whatever reason just to pursue some of them and leave others to lie on the file? And as you will know, that can happen quite often. Can the benefit of those offences come into confiscation? Absolutely, yes, it can. if it's a criminal lifestyle confiscation, then the benefit of those offences can be brought in. What the Crown has to do is to satisfy the court on a balance of probabilities that that benefit has arisen to the defendant. But not benefit from criminal allegations of which the defendant has expressly been acquitted. So if the prosecution have offered no evidence on a count, and therefore the court has recorded a not guilty verdict against it, then in confiscation, the court cannot undo, as it were, its not guilty verdict. The defendant is not guilty and does not obtain benefit from offences from which he's been acquitted. Okay, that's kind of done benefit. And I did say I would very quickly talk about how much of the defendant's benefit is obtained jointly. Now, the reason that's one of the 8 questions is that the confiscation order should indicate where the defendant's benefit includes benefit obtained jointly with one or more persons who might be identified and might not be identified. They may be persons unknown, but where that benefit has been obtained simultaneously with one or more others. This is because ultimately the state should not recover in confiscation the same benefit more than once from multiple defendants. And there is that risk, isn't there? I talked about John and Joe previously, who stole the painting valued at £100,000. If the state were able to recover £100,000 from each of them in terms of confiscation, then the result would be that the state would have recovered £200,000 when the value of the theft was only ever £100,000. And that is not acceptable. That can create difficulties, however, where a defendant is ordered to pay an amount reflecting both benefit he's obtained solely and benefit he's obtained jointly, and he pays only part of his total benefit. He's ordered to pay only a part of it. For example, then the issue is, well, is what he's paying the solely obtained benefit or the jointly obtained benefit? Now, how can we tell, and how do we apportion it, or do we not apportion it between those two? So if we've got John and Joe who've committed, say John's committed some other offences and he's got £50,000 of additional benefit from other offences which Joe wasn't involved in, and then John gets an order to pay £75,000, how much does Joe have to pay? Is Joe limited to having to pay £25,000 because at that stage the state will have recovered £100,000 and £100,000 was the total of the jointly obtained benefit? Or is it the case that John's £75,000 which he's paying relates £50,000 to his benefit which he obtained on his own, and only £25,000 to the jointly obtained benefit with Joe, in which case Joe's going to have to pay up to £75,000. Unfortunately, the case law doesn't sort that out for us. It doesn't actually tell us how to do that. You can imagine the way the prosecution are going to want to do that. You can imagine the way the defence are going to want to do that. And the law, I'm afraid, doesn't tell you which of those is the correct method. So that's all I wanted to say about benefit obtained jointly. We've covered questions 3 and 4. In a fortnight, we will go on to questions 5 and 6. But let me just remind you how Bartfield's Forensic Accountants can help you. We are fully staffed, even in a pandemic. We're undertaking legally aided work. We're undertaking privately funded work, criminal work, civil forensic accountancy work. And fortunately for us, it is relatively easy for us to conduct the bulk of our work remotely using our up-to-date and secure IT facilities. We are readily contactable by phone, by email, and online. And the website is full of useful information and, of course, is accessible 24/7. More on this topic can be found on the Bartfield's Forensic website And this and previous webinars can be found in the seminars section of the website, where you can see a recording of this. In any event, a link to the recording will be sent to you by email. And if you want to get in touch with me, my email address and phone number are there. It is much better to get hold of me by email because I'm not always available on the phone. But the phone number is there if you want to leave a message, or the email address to get in touch with me. Thank you very much for your time. I will see you again in a fortnight, and look after yourselves until then. Thank you.